Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is a Legacy School Literacy lesson for Year 6. In this lesson, we're going to be starting our new unit, Unit 3. It's about descriptive writing, so you'll need your Checkpoint 1 textbooks opened up to page 41. So before we begin, what types of text have we been working with so far? Well, in Unit 1, we've had a look at different types of factual writing. And in Unit 2, we've looked at autobiographies. We read a few. Some of them were really funny, some of them were sad. And now we are going to be focusing on descriptive writing, like I said. So first of all, what is descriptive writing? It's a style of writing where everything is described in great detail. All right, so topics that are covered in descriptive writing could be a place, like the setting is described in great detail, and that helps paint a picture in the mind of the reader. Like, for example, in Harry Potter, when they describe Hogwarts, you can almost imagine what Hogwarts looks like from all the details in the text. You can describe a person, and you can also describe an animal. You can describe a person or an animal's emotions, or you can describe the atmosphere or the feeling around the setting, or the feeling that the character gets when they arrive at a setting. And we're going to have a look about that later on in the unit. So, do we use descriptive writing on its own or when we write stories? The answer is both. Like I said, it helps paint a mind or paint an image in the mind of the reader. So it's very helpful. So would a story and an account sound good without descriptive parts? In my opinion, no. The description is very, very, very important because I want to feel what the character is feeling, and I want to know what the character looks like. I want to know what the setting looks like, so then I can start to feel a certain way about it as well. It just sounds like a list of adjectives or events that happened without it, and readers are interested in how something happens and not just what happens in the story. I think we can all agree with that. Some of the best stories out there are extremely descriptive, and it helps us to connect to them. So I'm going to go ahead and read the introduction on page 41, the introduction to the unit. When you are writing something imaginative, such as a story or an account of an interesting person or a personal experience, you can make your writing more effective by including detailed descriptions of people and places. To write effective descriptions, you need a clear picture in your mind of who or what it is that you are setting out to describe. So it helps sometimes to maybe close your eyes and picture the place where the story that you're writing is set in. For me, it helps because then I can picture these small details that I would like to describe. Doing this allows you to focus on precise details, which makes the descriptions come alive in the reader's mind. Good writers incorporate descriptive passages into the overall piece of writing, rather than writing descriptively for the sake of it. So, your story isn't going to be descriptive from start to finish. You are going to pick and choose which passages in your story that you want to be described in great detail. Like, for example, if the character is entering a new setting, you'd probably want to describe that. Or if another important character comes along and your main character is meeting them for the first time, you might want to describe that new character in great detail. A good rule to follow in writing descriptions is to base what you describe on your own experiences. And we talked about this a little bit in class. For example, the extract that we're about to read, this next text, is all about a really, really hot day in Jamaica. And what we did is we actually empathized with it, and you'll see how we do that a little bit later. But for example, none of us had been to Jamaica. We never experienced the heat of Jamaica, but we all know what it feels like to be in Sudan on a really hot day when the power is out, right? So even if you want to write about an experience that you've never had, you can always base it on experiences that you've had that are similar to that. So if you're writing about a hot day, think about what a hot day feels like to you, and then describe that feeling in your text. So this doesn't mean that writers always describe exactly what they have seen or people they have met, but that they use their real life experiences as a basis for their descriptions and then develop from there on. Here are 5 examples of descriptive writing, extracts 1 to 5. Today we're only going to read extract 1. Read the passages carefully and answer the questions that follow. All of these passages are taken from books written in the last 150 years or so. The earliest was published in 1854. That was quite a while ago. Extracts 1 and 2 describe very hot days in the countryside. Extract 1 is set on the island of Jamaica in the Caribbean. Extract 2 is set in Botswana and southern Africa. And with that said, I'm going to go ahead and flip to the next slide where I have my text. You can open up your books. I'll read it and then I'll read it over once, and then we'll go line by line and describe each description, or go over each description. So extract 1, a high wind in Jamaica. The sun was still red and large. The sky above cloudless, a light blue glaze poured over the baking clay, but close over the ground a dirty gray haze hovered. As they followed the lane towards the sea, they came to a place where, yesterday, a fair-sized spring had bubbled up by the roadside. Now it was dry, but even as they passed, some water splashed out, and then it was dry again, although gurgling inwardly on itself. But the group of children were hot, far too hot to speak to one another. They sat on their ponies as loosely as possible, longing for the sea. The morning advanced. The heat grew quite easily hotter, as if some enormous furnace from which it could draw at will. Bullocks only shifted their stinging feet when they could bear the soil no longer. Even the insects were too lethargic to pipe. Here the word lethargic, you'll notice, has a star next to it. Lethargic means very, very tired. So even the insects were too lethargic to pipe. The basking lizards hid themselves and panted. It was so still, you could have heard the least buzz a mile off. Not a naked fish would willingly move his tail. The ponies advanced because they must. The children ceased even to think. All right, so this text describes a very, very hot day in Jamaica. Let's go back to paragraph 1. So it says the sun was still red and large. So this was midday. And so when the sun is largest, it's usually during midday. The sky above was cloudless. So usually clouds give us a little bit of cover from the sun, and it makes for a cooler day. But this particular day, there were no clouds to shield from the sun, so it was really hot. And a light blue glaze poured over the baking clay. So what they mean by the baking clay is they mean the ground was really, really dry to the point where it started to crackle up a little bit. And you've probably seen this in places in Sudan after the rainy season. Once it starts to dry up a little bit, we get mud that crackles. And the blue glaze is like where the sky, the horizon meets, where the sky meets the ground and the horizon. But close over the ground, a dirty gray haze hovered. And what they mean by this dirty gray haze is there's a bit of dust that's kicking up, like a kataha, if you know what that means. So there's a bit of dust in the air. As they followed the lane towards the sea, they came to a place where yesterday a fair-sized spring had bubbled up by the roadside. So there was a little spring by the roadside. A spring is fresh water that comes from under the ground. And like they said, it bubbled up yesterday, but it was so hot that now, which is the next day, it was dry. And a little bit of water splashed out of it, but then it was dry again, and it was gurgling inwards to itself. So gurgling means like the last of the water that's lower down into the spring is just making a noise, like the noise of water running. It says the group of children were hot, far too hot to speak to one another, and they sat on their ponies as loosely as possible, longing for the sea. Remember earlier when I said that we usually relate our experiences to our writing? So I think we've all had the experience of sitting inside with the power out or the electricity out on a really hot day. Are you usually in a mood to sit around and chat with people and play and have a good time and laugh? I don't know, but personally, I don't really want to talk to anybody when it's a hot day and there's no power in the house. So I think these boys or this group of children feels the same way. It was hot, far too hot to speak. So just imagine how hot it is. They sat on their ponies, their little horses, as loosely as possible. Also, when the power is out and it's really hot, you probably don't want anybody sitting too close to you, right? You need some room to breathe, some room for air to hit you, right? And you're all sweaty and sticky anyway. So I guess that's how they're feeling, because they were sitting very loosely on their ponies. They weren't hugging them too tight. All right, so the morning advanced. It's growing later in the day. The heated air grew outside easily hotter, as if from some enormous furnace from which it could draw at will. So a furnace is like the opposite of an AC. It's like an appliance that heats up the house. So they said the air was getting hotter and hotter, like it was a huge furnace that could be drawn at will. Like you could put it up and make the heat higher, or get the heat higher. So bullocks shifted on their stinging feet when they could bear the soil no longer. Bullocks are a male cow. So they were moving their feet. They were picking their feet up and putting them down because the ground was so hot and it was burning their feet. And this is another instance where you can relate it to your own experiences. I asked the class if they had ever gone outside into the garden or into their house courtyard or into the street barefoot on a hot day, and a lot of them said yeah, and my feet burned and I was running so quickly because it hurt my feet so badly. All right, so the bullocks here were feeling the same way. It was stinging their feet, so they kept picking them up and shifting. The insects were too lethargic to pipe. Even the insects felt like it was so hot that they didn't even want to make any noise. The basking lizards hid themselves and panted. So lizards usually like to lie out in the sun. That's called basking. But this day was so hot, even they were hiding and they were panting. They were breathing heavily, just like a dog. And you could have heard a little buzz from a mile away. This is a bit of an exaggeration. This is a hyperbole. You probably couldn't have heard it from literally a mile away, but they just mean that the day was so still and it was so quiet because it was hot. They said not a naked fish would willingly move its tail. This is a type of animal. Also didn't want to move because it was so hot. And only the ponies were moving because they had to, because the children were riding them. And the children ceased even to think. The children stopped thinking. This is also an exaggeration, but it's like it was so hot that their brains melted. They couldn't even think anymore. All right, so let's go ahead and look at the questions now. Exercise 1, a high wind in Jamaica. From extract 1, choose 3 details that convey the extreme heat from the day. Give reasons for your choice. So I want 3 details or 3 quotes from the text that shows just how hot the day was, and then explain why you chose those 3. Number 2, how did the heat affect the children? I think this is very straightforward. I want you to select 3 quotes from the text surrounded by quotation marks. Okay, and at number 3, this is the only question where you're going to explain in your own words or use your own words. So, in your own words, explain how the animal life responded to the heat. So, how did the heat affect the animals? We have lots of examples of that in the text. I have 2 additional questions for you. Question 4, I want you to find examples of exaggeration. We just talked about those. And question 5, what is the comparison used in the second paragraph? So you're going to read the second paragraph carefully. And what is a sentence or a phrase where something or 2 things were compared to one another? Okay, I want you to find those, write them down in your copybooks, and send me a clear picture on the Seesaw app. All right. Now that we're done with that, I want you to go ahead and have a look at the next text. It's called The Number 1 Ladies Detective. All right, so I'm going to read through this text really carefully. This is another text about a very hot day. It's in Botswana. It's set in Botswana, Africa. So, suddenly she saw the house, tucked away behind the trees, almost in the shadow of the hill. It was a bare earth house in the traditional style. brown mud walls, a few glassless windows, with a knee-height wall all around the yard. A previous owner a long time ago had painted designs on the walls, but neglect in the years had scaled them off, and only their ghosts remain. She opened the door and eased herself out of the van. The sun was riding high. Its light prickled at her skin. They were far too west here, too close to the Kalahari Desert, and her unease increased. This was not the comforting land she had grown up with. This was the merciless Africa, the waterless land. All right, so first of all, they describe where the house is located, and it's tucked away behind trees, almost in the shadow of a hill. But before we get into all of that, where is the Kalahari Desert? It is in Botswana, parts of Namibia, and it's located generally in the southern parts of Africa. And how is Africa described in the text? In the last sentence, it's described as merciless. So not the easiest place to live in, and it's described as waterless as well. I guess that's something we can kind of relate to. Even in the nicest places in Khartoum, everybody experiences days where there is no water. What is she describing as a comforting land? I think that's easy. Her home. It says this was not the comforting land she had grown up with. So obviously that means her home. All right, so let's go ahead and look at words and phrases that describe the house. First and foremost, if you look at the third and fourth line, it says a previous owner a long time ago had painted designs on the wall, but neglect in the years had scaled them off and only their ghosts remain. What they mean by that is only a faded version of the painting remained on the walls. They had faded over years. Just like if you saw a ghost before on a TV show or a movie, they're usually like transparent, a little bit faded away. So same thing with the paintings. They're a bit faded. So these are some phrases and words that describe the house: tucked away behind the trees, in the shadow of a hill. It's made of earth, which means it's made out of mud bricks. Traditional, glassless windows, brown mud walls, the knee-height wall around the yard. These are all things that are all phrases or words that are used to describe this house. All right. So, do you think she described the house well? In my opinion, I think she really did. What are the feelings of the visitor? I think the visitor feels very uneasy because in the text it said that as soon as she saw it, her unease increased. So she was already feeling a bit nervous, right? And then when she got out of the van, which she didn't do quickly at all, they said she got out of the van very slowly. She eased herself out of the van. So she was nervous about getting out. Her unease even increased after that. So she's very, very nervous. She's not really happy about visiting. How was the weather or the climate described? So they said that it was merciless. It was extremely hot. The sun was in the middle of the sky. The land is waterless, which means it's pretty harsh, uninviting weather. It was also prickling her skin. Is the land welcoming or hostile? I think we already answered that. We said that it was prickling her skin and it was merciless. So we learned from the book that the lady detective is visiting the house of a murderer. All right, so this house is actually the home of a murderer. How does the description of the house and the surroundings emphasize this point? It emphasizes it by describing it as an unfriendly environment. They use powerful adjectives that give negative feelings. What makes this extract descriptive, you ask? It describes the place, the surroundings, the weather, the feelings. So in general, we kind of feel what this woman is feeling as she's approaching the house. How is it similar or different to factual writing? It describes precisely, just like factual writing, or some types of factual writing where they go into great detail. But in this case, it expresses feelings very vividly from the point of view of the author. What do you think is going to happen after this scene? I want you to go ahead and pull out a sheet of paper and answer that for yourself. Take a clear photo of it and upload it to the Seesaw app. Thank you very much, and if you have any questions, please ask me on the Seesaw app.